Today, I want to share with you our history bit. And as you know, our history bit is going to come from the book that we've written called The Scatterings of Israel. So, for a little while, you'll be hearing history bits from the book as we share portions of it to provide you with information that we hope will enlighten and edify and inform you so that when you look into the scriptures, hopefully the scriptures will make better sense. When you look at the world around you, when you look at history, it may make better sense. And this is the reason why we provide the history bits, whether they come from this book or from another source. It's so that you may be able to understand the things of Elohim a bit better and then be able to grow in your faith. So today we're going to look at portion of chapter 11 in the book, and we're going to read just a couple of pages, and it has to do with present day descendants of the Israelites. Present day descendants of the Israelites. And this portion is going to deal with many Native Americans. Now, I do want to say something before reading. In a couple Shabbats past, we did a history bit where we were reading concerning where the Israelites went. And we made mention that one of the places, out of the many places where the Israelites have went, was the Americas. And so the content of what will be read here will more than likely be a restatement of some of those things that we had read. But it's going to highlight some evidences that help to give us some archaeology to back up the claim that Israelites came to the Americas. So, present day descendants of the Israelites, many Native Americans are those I should read. The evidence of many Native Americans being descendants of Israelites has been attested upon the prophecy of 2nd Ezra. Let us look at the prophecy again for confirmation. In reading 2nd Ezra chapter 13, verses 39 through 46, it reads, "And for your seeing him gather to himself another multitude that was peaceable. These are the 9.5 tribes that were taken away from their own land into exile in the days of Hoshea, whom Salmanassar, king of the Assyrians, made captives. He took them across the river, and they were taken into another land. But they formed this plan for themselves, that they would leave the multitude of the nations and go to a more distant region where no human beings had ever lived, so that there at least they might keep their statutes, that they had not kept in their own land. And they went in by the narrow passages of the Euphrates River. For at that time the Most High had performed signs for them and stopped the channels of the river until they had crossed over. Through that region, there was a long way to go, a journey of a year and a half. And that country is called Arez Areth. The name Arez Areth literally means a land, or another land. Then they lived there until the last times. This is the prophecy concerning it. The key statement in this prophecy is that the Israelites would go to a more distant region where no human beings ever lived. At the time that this prophecy was made, the Americas was one of the few places that fit the description. And that time, or at that time in history, the so-called Americas were that distant region that was far away from the multitude of the nations. I want to pause for a moment. Most of us are familiar and aware that in what is called the old world, what is regarded as Europe, Asia, and the continent of Africa, all of that great body of land was regarded as the old world. And in that region or regions, we have a multiplicity of nations. And so when we look at the prophecy that was mentioned, it says that they wanted to go to a place where there were no other human beings living, away from the multitude of the nations. And so that would indicate to us that there were lands that in their understanding had not yet been occupied. Before the breaking up of the landmass, according to the scriptures, which occurred during the same time that the Most High had confounded the languages. What we need to be mindful of is that the pre-flood fathers, they knew all of the lands that were existing at the time because they had not been broken up or divided. And so the information concerning these lands, of course, was passed down throughout oral history to not only Noah, but also Noah's sons. And they communicated that information as well. And so there was an understanding, there was an awareness that these Israelites had concerning other lands that were unpopulated. I'll continue reading. Even though prophecy lays the foundation for many Native Americans having an Israelite heritage, yet there is yet more evidence to make known. One is the testimony made by a Marrano Sephardic Jew named Antonio de Montesinos in 1644 CE. He had an encounter with Native Americans of South America living in the jungle of Quito province of Ecuador that spoke Hebrew and informed him of another Israelite tribe living nearby. Ronald Sanders, in his book called Lost Tribes and Promised Lands, provides us with these details. Listen to the following. Quote, eventually a canoe appeared bearing 3 men and a woman, all of them Indians, to the place where Francisco and Montesinos were standing at the water's edge. The woman got off and spoke to Francisco in an Indian tongue that Montesinos could not understand, although he could perceive that he was being identified in the conversation. She then turned to her male companions to explain the situation. Upon hearing her words, they rose, went over to Montesinos, and to his utter astonishment said, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Hear, O Yisrael, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. They had recited in the Hebrew the fundamental credo of Judaism. They told him that they were themselves of the tribe of Reuben, and that the tribe of Joseph lived on an island nearby. This is in Sanders's book, page 364. Along with this evidence are Israelite tribal customs that are practiced by many Native American tribes. Some of these customs are new moon festivals, seventh day of rest, abstinence from eating swine, and the celebration of the 7 annual feasts. The Arawak, Cherokee, and Cheyenne are some examples of native tribes that practice Israelite customs. The Cherokees' traditional name for themselves means the principal people of Yah. Also, the Cherokee call the Most High Yahuwah. According to Chief Joseph Riverwind of the Northern Arawak Tribal Nation, in an article called Native Americans and the Jews, it states, quote, that while among his people, the ancient name for God is Yah, end quote. And this is in an article called Native Americans and the Jews in YHWH.com. The final piece of evidence that support or in support of Israelite heritage among many Native Americans are 2 archaeological finds. The first being the Los Lunas Decalogue stone. How many of you ever heard of the Los Lunas Decalogue stone? I don't have the picture up. I do have it in the book, but what I'll do at another time is show you a diagram of the Los Lunas stone. I'll continue reading. The first being the Los Lunas Decalogue stone. This 80-ton boulder was found near Los Lunas, New Mexico. It has a written version of the 10 Commandments in the Paleo Hebrew language. This stone is believed to be over 500 to 2,000 years old, predating the colonization of the Americas by the Europeans. While there are those that have chosen to discredit the claims of this find, we cannot dismiss the fact that there is evidence of Israelite heritage among the native peoples of the Americas. The second archaeological find is the Bot Creek stone. How many of you ever heard of the Bot Creek stone? This find was discovered in 1889 by John Emmert, who worked for the Smithsonian Institute. The stone had an inscription in Paleo Hebrew. After a number of examinations over a period of decades, a report was produced by American Petrographic Services Incorporated. In 2010, let me pause for a moment. Now, this particular archaeological find was discovered in 1889, and they had continuously been doing reports on this stone. So now, the American Petrographic Services in 2010, in this report, it was concluded that the inscription was present in the stone at the time of its discovery in a native burial mound. The following are the conclusions quoted from that report. Before I read 3 conclusions that were reported, I need to say this because anytime archaeological finds have been discovered, there are always those who will have something negative to say about it. This particular stone, as some would want to negate, as with the Los Lunas stone, there are those who will say, well, it was found and it was inscribed after the fact. Or this particular stone, it was taken out of the burial ground and someone inscribed those letters. Well, it had been tested over many years, and this was their findings. The conclusion of their finding was that this particular stone was the way it was when they found it in the burial mound with the other burial elements, because there was a skeleton that was there with it, right? So I'll go ahead and read the report of the findings. It says, number 1, our geological findings are consistent with the Smithsonian Institute's field report written by John W. Emmert. In other words, John W. Emmert gave a report of this back in 1889, and then you come along some almost 20 years later, another report is done, and they say our geological findings are consistent with the Smithsonian Institute's field report written by John W. Emmert. Number 2, the complete lack of the orange-colored silty clay residue in any of the characters of the inscription is consistent with many hundreds of years of weathering in a wet earth mound comprised of soil and hard red clay. Number 3, the inscribed stone and all the other artifacts and remains found in the mound with it can be no younger than when the bodies of the deceased were buried inside the mound. And that is from the American Petrographic Services Incorporated concerning the Bot Creek Stone in 2010. And I do have a copy of the report in my files. So what is interesting about these archaeological finds is that you have the Paleo-Hebrew found over here in the Americas. How does that happen? Is the question you have to ask. There's written testimony that goes back to the 17th century of Montesinos, who was a Marrano Jew. He was a Sephardic Jew. And also we have the archaeological evidence that shows us that there is a witness of an Israelite presence here in the Americas. And so I trust that this information has helped to enlighten and inform each of you in regards to what we believe is the truth, that there are many Native Americans that are descendants of the house of Israel. And this should not be a surprise, because the Almighty said that if you break my covenant and if you do not keep my commandments, I will scatter you throughout all of the nations. And he said, from one end of the heavens to the other. That means to all lands. That's what he said he was going to do. And with that, the Most High be praised.